Good evening, hello and welcome. You're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Anusha Soni. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his first state visit to the United States of America. On the table right now is everything, from defense cooperation to crucial conversations around technology, telecom, space, manufacturing and possibly semiconductors. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a power-packed schedule as the crucial visit is set to commence. The Prime Minister is expected to land in about 90 minutes from now. International Yoga Day celebrations at the UN headquarters in New York to a dinner being hosted by President Joe Biden at the White House. India is being seen with renewed hope and enthusiasm in the shifting paradigms of geopolitics, with the expansionist policies of China making the world's superpowers absolutely nervous. Can India reset the global power blocks and strike just the right kind of balance? Our focus on brass tacks tonight.
As much as there is strategic cooperation, whether it's on the Indo-Pacific, whether it's the common threat of China, whether it is, of course, the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, all of those issues will be discussed as well. But I think critical emerging technologies is going to be one big, broad area of focus in the overall India-US bilateral relationship. A whole bunch of substantive deals, particularly in defense technology, are going to be signed. The big one, of course, being the GE jet engine deal for the 414 GE jet engines, which are going to be manufactured in India. There's going to be a great degree of technology transfer as well as part of that deal. Also, the other big deal in the defense realm, which is expected, happens to be the Predator armed drone deal.
Shared values between the two countries are so significant. Shared values like democracy, rule of law, a market economy. American citizens who are of Indian descent, they have continued to contribute to the improved relations between the United States and India.
Well, joining us on the broadcast is our managing editor, Zakir Jacob, tracking that first state visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States, live from New York. Good morning, Zakir. Thank you for joining us. We'll just try and connect with Zakir. I believe there's some problem with that connection. But as I said earlier, in just about 90 minutes, the Prime Minister is expected to make a landing. And right after he lands on the U.S. soil, there's a very warm welcome that has been planned by the Indian diaspora and the community. It's a power-packed schedule. The Prime Minister is expected to meet a host of people, right from Elon Musk to various people from the business community, people from arts, cinema, entertainment. It's a slew of hosts and dignitaries who have lined up to meet the Prime Minister. As I said earlier, this is indeed a moment for India, keeping in mind that various superpowers across the world are looking towards India with renewed hope and enthusiasm, keeping in mind that looking at the South Asian region right now, with disturbances in countries like Myanmar, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India is the only ray of hope. And amidst all of this turbulence, India could be looked at and always has been looked at as a long-term strategic partner by the U.S. And could that reliance further increase to contain the expansionist policies of China? Zakir Jacob back with us on the broadcast live from New York. Good morning, Zakir. The Prime Minister lands in about 90 minutes from now. And first would be a very warm welcome by the Indian diaspora, the Indian community.
That's correct. They're going to be here. We're outside the Lotte New York Palace Hotel, where the Prime Minister and the official Indian delegation will be staying. So good morning to you from Madison Avenue here in New York City. The Prime Minister will land at JFK, which is about an hour away from here at Long Island, in about an hour and a half from now, at about 1 o'clock local time. There will be a small gathering of Indian Americans there at the airport, but the larger one, the larger diaspora gathering, is going to be outside the Lotte Hotel here. And I'm given to understand that every time the Prime Minister has come here, mind you, he has come 6 times since 2014. Every time he comes here, he comes to the Lotte Hotel and he stays here. At least his engagements here in New York City are based out of the Lotte Hotel. This is in Madison Avenue and 50th West Street. Here in New York, in the second half of the day, he'll be meeting with an eclectic group of people. Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and Twitter, he'll be meeting the Prime Minister today. He'll also be meeting Nobel laureates, folks from the film world. So the conversations will be with an eclectic group of people for about 3 or 4 hours in the second half of the day, from about 4 o'clock local time till about 8 o'clock or so. And then tomorrow is the big Yoga Day celebration that's going to happen here on the Upper East Side, next to the Turtle Bay at the UN headquarters, overlooking the East River, the beautiful setting of the North Lawns, where at 8 a.m. local time tomorrow, Prime Minister Modi will be leading the Yoga Day celebrations. Remember, it's after the Prime Minister became PM in 2014, and in 2015 is when the United Nations officially declared the 21st of June as International Day of Yoga. So the Prime Minister will be leading the Yoga Day celebrations, and then at 10:30 tomorrow morning he leaves for Washington, D.C. In Washington, again, in the second half of the day tomorrow, he'll be having a series of engagements with CEOs, think tanks. Remember, the Beltway is heavily populated with think tanks, and there's a lot to talk about, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine war, whether it is the looming threat of China, and of course, one very, very important issue that will feature very significantly in this visit is going to be critical emerging technologies. Just want to give you a sense of where we are. Like I said, if you've been to New York, this is Madison Avenue. On the left of Madison Avenue, you find the iconic Saks building, the Saks & Company building, the Saks Fifth Avenue, the famous fashion chain. They're just right around the corner. There's also the St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is, again, one of the oldest chapels here in New York City. And like I said, the Prime Minister will be staying here at Lotte, New York. And then tomorrow's events and functions will be at the UN headquarters. You can't see it from here, but it's sort of down the road and Upper East Side, where he will be leading the Yoga Day celebration. So it's going to be a packed day, both here in New York and, of course, tomorrow in the second half, he'll be headed out to Washington, D.C. And Thursday is the big day there for the ceremonial state visit and the state dinner, the banquet that will be hosted by President Biden and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden.
Zaka, you spoke about the strategic cooperation in different areas, including technologies, semiconductors. I want to talk specifically about the defense cooperation and the manner in which India and U.S. are looking at this entire area. We had the U.S. Defense Secretary and Indian Defense Minister who had about 2 weeks ago a very important and a crucial meeting. Perhaps there was a roadmap also that was agreed upon on the two sides. And keeping that into mind, what kind of build-up, what kind of deals are we expecting? What kind of understanding are we expecting? Is the effort of the United States also to ensure that India weans away from its reliance on the Russians, comes more towards the American side, keeping in mind that they see us as a long-term ally and perhaps a power that can help them contain China in the South Asian region?
So clearly, I mean, this has been a process that's been under works for the last 20 years or so. Remember, before the 1990s, India and the United States virtually had next to zero defense cooperation. That was because during the Cold War, India had sort of thrown its lot behind the USSR, the Soviet Union, whereas the US was sort of funding and giving military aid to Pakistan. So that was the situation for the first 40 years since independence. Things started changing in the late 90s, early 2000s, not just in the defense relationship, but also in the strategic relationship in the mid-2000s when we were talking about the nuclear deal and making an exception for India. That was unprecedented. The United States had never made an exception for India for a non-NPT signatory. So I think it started sometime in the late 90s, mid-2000s. There were these 4 foundational agreements which India signed. It was a process without which, of course, the US is barred by the US Congress from sharing any kind of defense transactions or even technology. So those 4 foundational agreements over a period of time, starting in the UPA era and then moving on to the NDA era, those foundational agreements got signed. Now what we're going to see during this visit is sort of the fruits of that foundational agreements being signed. One big deal that is expected to be announced is the GE jet engine deal, the F414 GE jet engines, which will be manufactured in India. Now, I think the important thing to underline is the transfer of technology. The India-US defense relationship up until now was by and large characterized as a bit like a transactional relationship, a buyer-seller relationship. The Americans sell and we buy. Whereas now, I think the next phase of defense cooperation is going to be about transfer of technology. It's going to be about making in India. So Indian officials are stressing on the fact that, according to them, at least by 80% of value technology transfer will happen between GE and its and the counterpart that it's signing the agreement with, which is Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, to manufacture these jet engines, the 414s, which will then become the bulwark of the Tejas Mk2, the light combat aircraft. That's one big deal. The second one is the Predator armed drone. Now, if you go back and look at how the United States Army and its various services have been using unmanned aerial vehicles, you can go all the way back to the late 2000s during the war on terror. A lot of the high-profile Taliban targets were taken out by unmanned aerial vehicles, either operating in Afghanistan or operating in the tribal areas of Pakistan. So the Predator is sort of the bulwark. It was one of the first highly successful unmanned aerial vehicles used by the U.S. military. Now we're given to understand that this will be another big deal that will be signed when the Prime Minister visits the U.S. We don't know the exact number of Predators that have been ordered or the orders have been placed for, but we're given to understand that all three services, the Army, Navy and the Air Force, were interested in the Predators. And you can see why. I mean, you just look at the Russia-Ukraine war and look at the kind of intensity and look at the kind of, damage that drones are causing, whether it is being used by the Russian side or even being used by the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians are also using both American-made drones, some of them even Turkish-made drones, and trying to attack targets deep inside Russia. So I think both sides here realize that the future of warfare is going to be unmanned, whether it is unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned submersible sea vehicles, and so on. So I think the thrust is going to be in that direction. And quickly before I wrap, critical emerging technologies. We saw Jake Sullivan, the US NSA, there last week. This is something that both sides are stressing on in a big way, because they realize the importance of semiconductors. They realize, particularly after the COVID period, after this heightened rhetoric we're seeing between China and Taiwan, and the buzzword that US officials from the president downwards have been using for the last few months is de-risking from China. And they realize that the number one risk when it comes to China is a potential military confrontation with Taiwan. So semiconductors is going to be another big focus area of this visit.
All right. Thank you, Zaka, for getting us all the details on that crucial visit. And we'll continue coming back to Zaka as he tracks that very important visit, the first visit of Prime Minister's state visit to the United States of America. Well, joining us on the broadcast is a full panel of guests, Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, who is the former candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia from the Republican Party, Raymond Vickery, who's a senior associate at the Vadwani Chair in U.S. India Policy Studies, Seema Sirohi, who's a columnist and author, and we also have Mr. Shashank, who's the former Foreign Secretary of India. Mr. Sanjay Puri, who's the chairperson of U.S. India Political Action Committee, is also with us on the broadcast. Thank you all. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I want to come to you first, Shashankji, and get in a view from you. This is the first state visit. He has visited U.S. in the past in different capacity, but this is the first state visit. On the table right now is a lot of cooperation between the two sides on different issues. As we look forward to this visit, which is all set to commence officially in about 90 minutes from now as the Prime Minister makes the landing on the U.S. soil, what are the key things to watch out for? There is so much on the table, but the one big thing that you're looking forward to?
There's a conscious decision on the part of the U.S. President to raise the level of Indo-US relationship by inviting Prime Minister Modi for the state-level visit. So this is the third prime ministerial visit at the state guest level in the United States. And we have been talking about the partnership, the defining relationship between US and India for this century. But they were all building blocks, coming up to the apex of the relationship. At the same time, there were many other worries on both sides. India was worried about Pakistan getting arms from the Americans being dependent on Pakistan in Afghanistan scenario, America-China relationship. So therefore, we were not very clear as to what extent US would go with India. But I think now President Biden has given a clear signal with this. Now, we have to just work on it. There might be some more time. So we'll have to just see how the visit goes.
How the visit goes. Raymond Vickery, coming to you and talking about the factor called China. And as my colleague Zaka Jacob was also pointing out, de-risking from China is something that the most, superpowers across the world are looking forward to, especially the United States of America, keeping in mind that the Chinese have openly challenged the kind of hegemony of sorts that U.S. enjoys across the world as the leading superpower. In terms of creating those strategic ties, with India, keeping in mind the Chinese threat in different capacities, not just on the trade front, but in the Indo-Pacific region and the various concerns that the Americans have expressed. How critical is this partnership between India and the Americans?
Well, thanks for having me. I think it's very critical. Obviously, India has more in common with the United States and democracy than it does with China, an autocracy who does not have a respect for the rule of law, who claims an entire Indian state, Arunachal Pradesh, as its own, and other areas along the border. China has shown that it is not a part of the international system when it comes to the South China Sea, to the free movement of vessels, and really the concentration on building peace and prosperity as opposed to national aggrandizement. So there is a huge commonality with China. I think the basic and most important thing, though, that'll come out of the Modi-Biden visit is a continuation along the path of not just having a transactional relationship between the U.S. and India. It's all well and good to say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore we work together. It is an entirely different thing to say we have things in common across the globe, which we want as two great world powers to work together on. And I think Prime Minister Modi's interview recently in regard to Ukraine is indicative of the relationship moving in that direction. When he says that India has made its position very clear, it's in favor of peace. It's not in favor of war. It's in favor of the respect for the rule of law and international boundaries. And this will all be promoted
I'm
by
very sorry, sir. I'm
relationship.
interrupting you there, but there's a press conference happening by John Kirby. We're cutting across live to that briefing.
Global order. As we think about the future of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and building resilient supply chains for clean energy technologies, semiconductors, and other critical and emerging technology, countering climate change, the future of our workforces, and global health, energy, food security, there is no partner more consequential than India. Now, we're hosting India for an official state visit to put our cooperation on an inexorable trajectory as we support India's emergence as a great power that will be central to ensuring U.S. interests in the coming decades. After years of strengthening our ties, the United States-India partnership is deeper and more expansive than it has ever been in the past. We now look instinctively to each other and work cooperatively with each other to uphold a free and open Indo-Pacific, to drive innovation, jointly tackle global challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Together, and working with other like-minded partners, our countries will shape the future, working towards a world that, again, is open and more prosperous, more stable, more secure, and quite frankly, more resilient. Now, we'll take some questions. Let's see, who's in the front here? Go ahead.
Thank you, John. I wanted to touch a little bit, if you could, in the how much Ukraine is going to be. Oh, of course, sorry. I'm Beatriz. I'm with EFE, News18 in Spanish. I wanted to ask about Ukraine. Ukraine has been proposing for months now. They have been proposing a peace summit.
Well, that was the White House briefing. We'll continue a close eye on all the developments happening at the White House ahead of the crucial visit of the Prime Minister. Guests continue to be with us on the broadcast. Sorry for that interruption. I want to cut back to Mr. Raymond Vickery. Mr. Vickery, I'm very sorry. Your point was interrupted. But you were pointing out to the various and numerous reasons why the ties between the Indians and the Americans are likely to deepen further. And this is the long-term relationship in the making. It has been for a while, but it's expected to pick up momentum much more than ever before.
I think it will pick up more momentum. And the really good news from the U.S. side is that the Republicans and the Democrats agree at least on one thing, and that is that the U.S.-India relationship should be strong. As you as you know, Prime Minister Modi will be addressing the Congress as well as interacting with the executive branch. And I'm happy to report with my dealings with the Congress that there is broad bipartisan support. The question is whether or not we can find common ground across the globe on the values which unite the U.S. and India, rather than just making it, am I going to buy arms from you? Am I going to help you out in regard to Ukraine? We have much more in common, and that is a good sign.
That is a good sign. I want to cut across to Mr. Sanjay Puri as well. Mr. Puri, a development beyond the transactional relationship between the Indian and Americans. We're talking about U.S. trying to woo India, trying to wean away the dependence that we have had on the Russians, but especially when it came to the war in Ukraine, or whether it was about the purchase of oil and what benefits better for India and its domestic interests. India made a very clear statement on the global platform, and it stuck by the stand it took. Despite objection coming in from different countries, sometimes muted, sometimes openly put out on the table. Now, talking about this cooperation and the willingness that Indians are ready to put on the table. How willing is India, and to what extent are we hedging our bets in terms of having the right kind of strategic partners? We have had deep ties with Russia. We also want to engage with a neighbor like China, and at the same time have good relationships, in fact, better relationship with a partner like United States of America. So how is India looking at the entire situation?
Thank you for having me. The reality is this is a different India than ever it has been before. It's a confident, it's important and aspirational India with a population of the youngest population in the world and a prime minister who's confident. The reception that he's getting, I've been there, and Ray Vickery can tell you, it's never been seen before. So this is not a transactional relationship, whether it's the Republicans, the Democrats. This relationship is now at an upward trajectory. Some of the things that you're going to see, the announcements, will tell you that this is a very strategic partnership. And there's a respect in the United States that India has to make its own choices, whether it is for Ukraine, whether it is for the S-400s, etc. You will not hear too much protest coming from the United States because this is an important relationship for a variety of reasons. It's the only democracy in a very tough neighborhood with two nuclear neighbors that they have. It's a huge marketplace, shared values. So you're going to see some key announcements. John Kirby talked about it. Your associate talked about it. The unarmed drone, the unmanned drones, that's a very significant thing. AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, space technology. You're going to hear a lot about space technology because the future warfare and economic opportunities are in this. And the United States is opening its kimono and saying, here, we want you to get the best of what we have. And that's never, ever happened before. So I think this is a seminal moment for India, and they should be very, very happy because it's really a recognition of 140 crore people that the Prime Minister talks about their work that has brought this country to this point.
Henry Kissinger famously said, only our interests are something which are dominating and perpetual and eternal in a certain way. And foreign policy in that sense is all about pursuing your domestic and global interests. That's what Americans are doing. And perhaps they align with the positioning, the strong positioning that the Indians have taken on the global platform on a host of issues. I want to cut across to Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia as well, who's been patiently listening to this entire discussion. Mr. Ahluwalia, there's an interesting aspect that I want to discuss. We were talking about China and how the threat of the Chinese is something that makes U.S. more keen and perhaps urgent in the way and manner they want to engage with India. There was also this U.S. Visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was in Beijing recently. And are we going to see more of the cooling down in relation between U.S. and China? And the fact that Mr. Blinken was there, Taiwan was one issue that was on the table that was discussed. There were certain statements that were also issued on this. How do you see the visit of Mr. Blinken and the kind of red carpet which was being laid out for Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, I think Biden administration is trying to make a statement about their foreign policy, having Secretary Blinken have a very successful visit so far in China, apparently trying to approach peace again. peace through strength, which has been America's motto, especially under President Trump. But more importantly, what the red carpet welcome for Prime Minister Modi is also a very important sign for China that the entire relationship, which is now Indo-Pacific, we used to call it Asia-Pacific, now we call it Indo-Pacific, predominantly to show the importance of the strategic geography, and most importantly, the confident India, as my good friend Sanjay Puri said, is to project the importance of India and the leadership of India, which has kind of evolved. And especially under Prime Minister Modi, I think what he did is he has really not just spoken for the developing nations, he's become the leader of the masses all across from Middle East to from Africa to Middle East to Asian nations, because he said he has shared with the United States leadership that this world is interconnected and interdependent. And everything cannot just be this global power. The failure of United Nations has to change. Countries like India and other nations have to play an important role. And I have to commend Prime Minister Modi in doing so. And that's also a success of the large Indian diaspora, which for the years have worked hard and persevered and have strengthened this relationship to reach this stage. So I think it's a success all around. And I do appreciate my American leaders who have recognized the strength and importance of India and the growing confidence in India, which is only going to go in the right direction. But at the same time, when we talk about shared values, we talk about democracy. You see, in Washington, we have a 15-second attention span and things can change. And they do change, as you know that very well. So it's important that we keep working this relationship, keep cementing it. And at the same time, it's a message to despots, autocrat, that this partnership or the relationship, the free-thinking people will always succeed. And as in Prime Minister Modi said, that we want to have peace around the world. So that's how the countries will
Mr. Alwaya, I'm going to pick up on what you said about the leadership for the developing nations and trying to put the issues of the developing nations, say various African countries, on the table. This is also the moment, and I take this point to Shashankji, who's with us on the broadcast, picking up from what Mr. Ahluwalia said. Now, with the G20 presidency that India has at this point in time, the global South remains unrepresented right now in G20. The idea is to put that concern on the table in terms of being included in G20 and various other development issues that have dominated the discourse. This was also highlighted by the Indian Foreign Secretary, Mr. Vinay Mohan Kwatra. But how would that be possible? Keeping in mind that there are major countries in G20 like China and Russia, and a lot of them don't see eye to eye. How can India use its leadership position to assert about these dominating issues, which should be discussed more often on these global platforms? Shashankji.
Well, G20 has given an opportunity to India to explain the views of the global South. And one thing which India has done is to have a virtual meeting with all the important countries of global South. Secondly, India has now proposed that African Union should be made a member of the G20. Thirdly, India knows that it's an aspirant to become the permanent member of the UN Security Council. But here what we are finding, that all permanent members of the UN Security Council are having trouble among themselves. There's U.S. And along with its friends, UK and France, and on the other hand, Russia and China. So therefore, if G20 can play a role, India is trying to build up that role. But we are finding again and again, the Western countries are asking that G20 should concentrate only on Ukraine. So that is the problem. So India has to convince the United States. And I think this is a great opportunity which we are finding now with President Biden having taken a very clear-cut decision that India has to be in a different league of relations with USA. It's not Pakistan, it's not China. It's in the league with the highest technology levels where they are willing to share things with us. They would like to build up in the critical and emerging technologies. That means for future. Quantum computing and space and all these kind of things. So I'm not talking of the past. So we'll have to work on it quite a lot. I'm not very sure whether India is prepared for everything as yet, because we remember that ChatGPT founder, Sam Altman, he came to India and he said, look, he doesn't see India setting up any new artificial intelligence platforms.
So Shashankji, I want to understand this more from you so that I can discuss it with our other guests and experts on the broadcast. When you say, are we really prepared for this? What are the concerns that are dominating your mind right now?
No, what I find is that we have been under sanctions for such a long time.
Right.
From the Americans and the Western powers, that we are trying to come out of it. And every time we find that the mindset among many departments in the US government and NGOs and academics and others, they still feel that India, which was a colonial territory for such a long time, can perhaps be again pushed around. And like they supplied hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the First and Second World War, so maybe they can be made to give more soldiers for China war and for Russia-Ukraine war. So that is the problem which Indians have, that they want that our best brains are going to the US, best brains are going abroad. Why can't we have the best brains work in India also, along with USA? So therefore, that is the responsibility which we are like to take on for future technology.
All right, picking on that point, Mr. Raymond Vickery, President Biden has said that India is an indispensable partner, and in fact, there's bipartisan support coming in for the long-term partnership and commitment with India as a key ally. Looking at the manner in which the global geopolitical equations are framing and the manner in which China is rising in clearly perplexing ways for the rest of the world, including Americans. But India is yet not part of critical groupings. Say, for example, AUKUS, even in Quad right now, for that matter, it looks more aimed at counterbalancing China. So in terms of finding the right ground and the right positioning with the Americans, what would it take?
Well, I think the American position is very clear in terms of the role which U.S. And India should play together in these international institutions. The United States has advocated for some time that India be made a part of the Security Council of the United Nations. China has blocked that. We've done everything we can in terms of normalizing relationships in regard to civil nuclear matters. So I think that is the case. The real question, it seems to me, is whether or not India is willing to look forward rather than backward toward a colonial era in which it needed to express its complete independence from other actors, and whether or not it will be willing to share on its side its most sacred technologies and its most sacred approaches to economic matters. It is the case that we're making great progress, but nobody should be under the illusion that India and the United States are in the position that they ought to be. And that is, in my judgment, that we ought to be working together across the board and willing to share based upon values as well as how much the transaction benefits either side.
How much the transaction benefits the either side, and as I said, the interest on both the sides is something that the Indians Americans would be negotiating. Mr. Sanjay Puri, this is indeed a country and India which has shed its colonial past and baggage. And even in terms of foreign policy, most experts would agree that there's a very strategic, clear-cut position that India has taken with much clarity, without any kind of political or diplomatic vagueness on the global stage, on the Indo-nuclear, on the Ukraine war, or for that matter, the manner in which we decided to buy oil from certain countries, despite the displeasure by various Western nations. A clean break from what we have pursued so far, is that something which is possible, Mr. Puri?
I think India has its own destiny in its own hand. I mean, the thing is, you have the youngest population in the world. You have a democracy. You don't interfere in other countries' affairs. You don't tell others what to do, unlike so many countries. It's a country with tremendous talent, whether it's technology talent, whether it's healthcare or things of that nature. It's the pharmacy of the world, so to speak. So it'll build its own strategic ties. Its relationship with the United States should be what works best for India, and its relationship with Russia and others should be just like United States does the same to it too. And I think India, as you said, is taking a very measured approach by pushing the global south and pushing the African Union, because the current world configurations, as some of our colleagues already mentioned, are broken. The UN Security Council and some of these other trade organizations, the United States walked out of some of these trade organizations, trade agreements also themselves. So now is the time for new configurations, whether it is, a trade agreement, whether it's an investment agreement. India has now the world in its hands because of what it has done. And I think you will see that with some of the announcements that are coming out.
Absolutely.
That there is not going to be, this is not an apology tour by Prime Minister Modi for buying oil from some countries or, doing this. This is not an apology tour. This is a state dinner, address to joint session,
and a red carpet which has been rolled out, as you point out, Mr. Puri. My last question to Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, and I want to talk a bit about the excitement that has been building up, especially in the Indian American community, the diaspora. There are various members which are going to be present. Of course, there are events, big ticket events also that have been planned, dinners that have been planned. What kind of enthusiasm, what kind of support? He has a personal brand and charisma that he carries as he travels to different nations, including the United States. So what kind of momentum, what kind of excitement?
I think Prime Minister Modi has a way, because he's a grassroots leader, he's always had a way to gravitate people towards him. Charismatic in his own way, great auditor. I guess, and we have a large, I think the religion has played a very important role because he's brought certain respect and recognition to the Hinduism, the yoga, the cultural aspect of India. And I guess that's what kind of gravitates people, and they feel proud and exude pride on that recognition. But I also want to say something. You have to realize, you have to give a lot of commend India and its leadership through Nehru all the way till Prime Minister Modi. The way it's graduated, India is a very divided nation. At the same time, it's a united nation as a country. And for this country to persevere through democracies, and unlike other nations, look at Pakistan, it's a basket case right now, and other Asian, African nations where the democracy suffocates every day. And I have to say that India has shown the world, and the Indian diaspora has shown the world, that if you have disciplined certain values, which we are very proud to have as a proud Indian. I'm very
at the
proud
university,
from
Mr.
India,
Ahluwalia, as a student of political science, when we would study democracies and we would study the ingredients to sustain a democracy, our professors would often say that India is an outlier. Most countries that got their independence post-47 have not been able to sustain democracy effectively and successfully. India has. And clearly that takes a lot. And all eyes on that big visit. I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Puneet Ahluwalia, Raymond Vickery, Seema Sirohi, Shashank, Mr. Sanjay Puri. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the big story that we'll continue tracking here on CNN News 18, that power-packed visit and the first state visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States.